So we've got green-white Tron. Um, this deck has recently surged in popularity. I would say it was completely off the radar until just the past month or so. And now it is the most popular version of Tron entirely. Green-red Tron not seeing as much play. And you've got some other Tron variants, but green-white, it's made a name for itself rather quickly. This is the Tom Ross build that I'm playing. And it's your straightforward Tron deck with a few white cards mixed in, essentially. Of course, you've got 4 of each Tron piece. No need for an explanation there. And then there's some weird one-ofs in the deck that I want to talk about. So you got a couple of green-white lands because we all know with Tron that sometimes you got a bunch of colorless lands in play and you don't actually have those colored sources. So you need some lands that can produce both of your colors. So Razor Verge Thicket and Horizon Canopy fill that role. Sanctum of Ugin. This is a card that you get late in the game with your Sylvan Scryings once you've already got Tron. And then when you play something like a Karn Liberated or an Ugin or what have you, you can then sacrifice it, get Ulamog, and even if your opponent has a pretty good board presence, it turns out Ulamog plus a big Planeswalker, that's pretty hard to get through. And then there's also a Gemstone Caverns. So this is a card that hasn't really seen play in Tron up to now, but you have to get lucky with it. You have to be on the draw and have it in your opening hand, but when you do, it's quite nice. And so it gets boarded out anytime you're on the play. So you see in the sideboard, basically you can swap Gemstone Caverns and Ghost Quarter based on play draw. So that's kind of neat. And there's a bunch of 1-mana spells in the deck. 4 Chromatic Spheres and Chromatic Stars because you need those both to draw your cards, filter towards getting your Tron online, but also to have another way to produce the colored mana. Expedition Map, I would argue, is the best of the 1-mana artifacts, the most important one, because it straight up finds a Tron piece. And then Relic of Progenitus. This is important because of Dredge, various graveyard-based decks running around, but even if you're not playing against a dedicated graveyard deck, it's still a fine card in a lot of matchups, whether you're playing against a Tarmogoyf or a Snapcaster Mage or what have you, or you just use it to cycle a lot of the time. Ancient Stirrings, also a very important component of the deck. It can get basically almost any card in the deck. So, might be the most important spell. I said Expedition Map was the most important artifact, but Ancient Stirrings might be the most important spell. It can get you a Tron piece, it can randomly find you an artifact, or it can go all the way up to your Planeswalkers, your Ulamogs. Just an absurd card in this type of deck. And it basically means you see all of the Tron variants play green, and it's because of Ancient Stirrings, also Sylvan Scrying, but more so Ancient Stirrings. And then Path to Exile is what the white is for, essentially. So just to have that easy spot removal spell. You see these decks that are going all in with pump spells, and if you're able to just have that 1 mana removal spell, it can be enough to turn the game in your favor against a lot decks like Infect or Death Shadow or whatever it may be. It's just a good card in this format. So lots of 1-mana cantrips. A lot of times you're going turn 1, artifact, crack an artifact, play another one sort of thing. That's the early turns until you get your Tron online. Sylvan Scrying, sort of similar to Expedition Map. It's mostly just to find a Tron piece, but sometimes you'll use it to find one of your random one-of lands as well. There's a Spellskite, which you can find off Ancient Stirrings. It's a good card in this format. It's good against Infect. It's good against Death Shadow. It's good against a lot of those types of decks, but there's also decks where it's bad against, so it's good and bad. Be aware of it. Sometimes it should get boarded out. Talisman is another way to fix your colored mana. It's a 1-of. And then down to 2 Oblivion Stones. I think part of the reason for that is we've got Ugin as well, which often plays a similar role. And once you get to 8 mana, you would normally rather just play Ugin than play Oblivion Stone and sacrifice it. But Oblivion Stone, it helps hedge because sometimes you don't have Tron and you just pay 5 mana regularly for Oblivion Stone. But it is an artifact and it does have that vulnerability, so fine with playing 2 copies. And then we've got our big spells. These are the Haymakers, the cards that win you the game once you have your Tron online. 4 copies of Karn. This is the card that you can play turn 3 and just completely wreck your opponent if you have the turn 3 Tron. But otherwise, it's just so versatile. You can plus it, you can minus it. 1 copy of World Breaker as well. So we've got lots of ways to, once we get to 7, we can start taking out our opponent's lands. And you know what? That's surprisingly pretty good. Of course, sometimes you go after other annoying permanents as well. 1 copy of Wormcoil. That may seem weird. Tron decks used to play more like 3 copies of Wormcoil. This one only plays 1. But that's more due to putting more of an emphasis on some of the other big mana spells. Like there's 3 copies of Ugin. Been super impressed with Ugin. It just takes over the game when you play it. So it's just great. You can minus it, you can plus it, ultimate it, do whatever you want with it. And then Ulamog is, of course, game over most of the time. You just get to 10. If you get to 10, you're in great shape. So that's the main deck. The sideboard is where things get interesting. Because this deck has some bad matchups floating around in Modern. Because it's not the most aggressive deck. It takes a little while to get Tron and then get your big mana spell into play. So you need cheap cards against the faster decks, the combo decks of the format. So I already mentioned the lands here. Nature's Claim, it's basically a hedge. There's a lot of artifacts in the format. There's some enchantments that are annoying. We don't want to play Stony Silence ourselves because we've got so many artifacts. So it's good against the artifact decks. There's also decks like Boggles where you want that enchantment removal. So it's a flexible card. Even the life game comes up where you use it on your own artifact to gain some life. That can be an option. The 4th Path to Exile. When you want these 3 in the main, normally you just board the 4th one in. A couple of Graveyard Hate cards, Rest in Peace and a Grafdigger's Cage. The Cage is more flexible. It comes in the Collected Company matchups and stuff like that, but both are important. Blessed Alliance. This card is really well positioned right now. It doesn't target, so it gets around cards like Vines of Vastwood or Apostle's Blessing or what have you in terms of the all-in creature decks. And it's also a life gain effect against the burn deck. So very versatile, strong card. Warping Well. This may raise some eyebrows, but it's pretty flexible. And as it turns out, there's a lot of creatures in this format that are low power and toughness. So I know when playing the blue-red deck with Kiln Fiends and Thing in the Ices and Monastery Swift Spears, I'm not happy to see a Warping Well. There's 2 Thragtusks. Thragtusk is good against burn, but it's also just a card that comes in a lot because it's also a grindy creature. It's another threat. So it plays 2 different roles. And then your Oblivion Stone. There's a lot of permanent-based decks running around. So if your opponent has Blood Moons or something of that nature, you really want to be able to get a Blood Moon or a Chalice of the Void off the table. So this is the list, and let's play some games.